Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2513. Today, we're going to take a deep dive with an author into the world of electric vehicles and the people or the drivers behind them. Be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in Dublin, Ohio with a very special guest by the name of Ken Boyer. Ken, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
I don't need to release the clutch. I drive an electric car.
I was kind of hoping you were going to say that. Yeah. First time I rented an electric car was during Car Week in Pebble Beach a few years back. Rented a Tesla. And you know this, but I had not driven Well, actually, I drove the Volt when it first came out. Chevy did a countrywide tour, and they came to our facility, and we were the first ones that got to play with those cars. But that was a long time ago. And I sat down in that Tesla, and I went, how do I start this thing? And I called my nephew who works for Tesla, and I said, is this the Tesla Caroline? I'm in my car, and I don't know how to start it. And he said, well, if you're in your car, it's already started, sir. So
there's a learning curve to almost everything in life, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to have some fun today because you've written a very interesting book that is very pertinent to what's going on in the electric vehicle world today. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But first, I always break the ice by asking my guests this. What's one little thing that people don't know about Ken Boyer?
Well, what's one little thing? Well, a lot of people don't realize until you get to know me that I'm really an 8-year-old at heart.
Okay.
I can do the adult things. I can write books. I can teach. I can do research. But I love games. I love playing with my soon-to-be 3-year-old grandson.
Fun.
And train stores love to see me walk in.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like you're at the same point in life. I've got a 3-year-old grandson, a 1-year-old granddaughter, and one on the way. So life's pretty cool with grandchildren, isn't it?
Yes, that is absolutely right.
Yeah, pretty special. Well, let me give you an introduction. We're going to dive into this book. Kenneth K. Boyer, what his friends call him Ken, combines a lifelong love of cars and engineering with a career focused on management and supply chain. He's the Fisher Designated Professor of Operations and Business Analytics at Fisher College of Business, Ohio State University. He was coeditor-in-chief of the Journal of Operations Management and served on the faculty at Michigan State and DePaul universities. Boyer is a member of the Academy of Management, Production, and Operations Management Society and the Decision Science Institute. Recently, he visited Vietnam to study Vinfast's rise in the electric vehicle world. He's published numerous academic articles and 2 books. The one we're going to talk about today is his latest book, The Electric Vehicle Revolution, 5 Visionaries Leading the Charge. The book takes a deep dive into the worldwide transition from ICE vehicles to EVs. We'll be back in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors. So give them a little love, and we'll be right back. Are you ready to take charge of your financial future? Then let me introduce you to Capitalize Your Finances. It's an online course designed to empower you with the knowledge and tools for mastering your money. This course will help you lay out the ins and outs of budgeting, the importance of emergency funds, investing strategies, and how to plan for a secure retirement. All this presented by financial planner Chris Paniotu. Chris has developed this course to help you effectively navigate your world of finance with confidence. Stop stressing about money and start taking control. Enroll in Capitalize Your Finance online course today and pave your way to financial success. To learn more, go to capitalizepodcast.com/courses, or better yet, go to the Cars Yeah website, show notes page for today's show, and click on the link under Capitalize Your Finances. You'll be glad you did. Do it today. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and first-hand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions, on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. So Ken, let's dive right into this because electric vehicles, oh my. They've come a long way, baby, but there's a lot of upheaval going on right now with these things. But I want to really talk about the different parts of this book. Gears of Change is maybe a bit of a subtitle. In your book, you talk about 3 gears of change, referring to willingness to commit, ability to profit, and transforming the supply network. And then you get into chapters about leaders in the industry. So let's start with the leaders, if you will, because the people that go over the hill first, as they say, are the first ones to get the arrows in them. This whole revolution is quite amazing. Can you walk us into the leaders that are, because there's a lot more people in here in the U.S. think of, well, Elon Musk, but there's a lot more to this. So can you walk us through that part of the book first?
Absolutely. And that's it's important, Mark, because in my book, it's the electric vehicle revolution. There's another book that came out about 4 months, similar with the same title. So you got to look for the 5 visionaries.
Yes.
So first visionary is the rise and evolution of Muscular. And I'll make this relatively quick. Elon and Tesla showed the concept. They showed that electric cars could be better, could drive better, and improve the concept. But it wasn't just Elon. It's a misperception. There are 5 founders of Tesla that had to sue Elon to be named co-founders. He brought money to the table. And I saw an article in Scientific American the other day that did a nice job of talking about how Elon and Tesla both benefited from what's called second mover advantage.
And what's that?
It's essentially electric cars have been around forever. In 1909, they were 1/3 of the choices of propulsion. 1/3 gasoline, 1/3 electric, 1/3 steam. There was never any certainty that gasoline cars were going to win out. It was Henry Ford, the OG, who shows up quite a bit in my book, who pioneered the moving assembly line with the Model T and made cars affordable. That's why gas won. So Musk and Tesla, Muscular, have shown the concept. Now what we're seeing is a race by everybody else to popularize and take electric cars mainstream. So let's switch gears to the Vietnamese Musk.
Okay.
So Pham Nhat Vuong was born at the height of the Tet Offensive, which for Americans of a certain age will bring back memories.
Oh, yeah.
Vietnam was at war. He grew up dirt poor, no money, in a war-torn country. Very smart young man, goes to study in Russia, in Moscow, then moves to the Ukraine after that, and starts a restaurant and then a noodle-making company, which he eventually flips to Nestle for $150 million.
Talk about a success story. Oh, my gosh. Wow.
And that's just the start of it. He moves back to Vietnam, starts a company, Vin Group, that develops property and sells property. By now, they've got Vin AI, Vin Phones, Vin Mart, Vin Schools, Vin Mech, Vin University, and Vinfast. Estimates are that the companies controlled by Vuong represent 2.5% of the Vietnamese economy. He's the richest man in Vietnam.
Wow.
So that brings us to Vinfast. Didn't exist in 2016.
Amazing.
Had never made a car.
Amazing.
So went out and recruited another one of my visionaries. Jim DeLuca was the head of all manufacturing for all of General Motors. Reported to Mary Barra, who's another one of my visionaries. Jim DeLuca retires in 2016, only to get a call from a headhunter and to be convinced to move to Vietnam to help start this new car company.
That must have been a lot of convincing. Holy cow.
It's described in my book in detail. My assumption is they threw a fair amount of money at Jim.
Okay.
But he also is an auto guy through and through who wanted the challenge of starting a brand new company. So he moves to Vietnam. They build an auto plant in Haiphong, 90 miles east of Hanoi. I got a tour of it when I was there. In 18 months from announcing it to opening it, they built it on a seafloor, reclaimed, and repurposed. You couldn't even get a permit in a Western country in 18 months.
No, I've been involved in some development projects with my last company, and they don't make it easy.
Not at all. So they build this car company, largest, most vertically integrated plant in the world. They negotiate with BMW to gain access to an older model chassis. They build gasoline cars. But then in 2021, they said, never mind, we're going to go all electric. That's either the most brilliant strategic decision ever or the dumbest. Time will tell. They announce a plant in North Carolina that they get President Biden to tweet about. Now, their entry to America has been kind of hard because many of the car companies are trying to do what Tesla and Musk did. They're trying to make a very expensive car, sell it to cover their costs, hoping the revolution will be easy. But revolutions are not easy. They're casualties, right?
Right.
So back to Vinfast. They're publicly traded on NASDAQ now, and they're making efforts. They move very fast. They learn quickly from their failures. Saw an announcement this morning that they're taking pre-orders for the VF3, which is their entry model, low-cost car, priced at a little bit less than $11,000 in the Philippines. And could they be successful? Yes, they have created out of nothing a company that is in the ballgame. And the industry needs a low-cost car. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, has been saying for 10 months that they created a skunk works in California to develop a low-cost car. Mm-hmm. The automakers would prefer to sell very expensive cars, but there's a limited number of well-off people that can afford those. So at the end of the day, just like the OG, Henry did, he made cars affordable. The car makers got to figure out how to make an affordable car.
Yeah. This, with all your knowledge with this, you hit the nail on the head in my mind. There's two huge problems with electric vehicles. Well, actually, I see three. One is cost of entry. Number two is what I call the tether effect, if you will, having to plug in and taking a while to work and so forth. And maybe we go a little further into this because one of the other biggies to talk about here is China.
Right.
What say you?
You can literally hear the elephant bounce
room.
into the room there.
Yeah.
So I had to make a choice. I'm only one person. I can't write the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I don't focus on the Chinese car makers, BYD, Xiaomi, Geely, and all those ones. But I do write fairly extensively about China in Chapter 2, the gears of change. And you mentioned earlier, what are the gears of change? Willingness to commit. It's essentially marketing. Who am I trying to sell something to, and how do I convince them? Ability to profit. Who's financing my venture, and who gets the revenues if it goes well? And then finally, transforming the supply network. In China, which this year is on track to sell roughly 50% of the cars will be electric, they've got a 2-decade history of promoting electric vehicles, starting with a gentleman by the name of Wang Gong, who wrote a white paper promoting and saying, here's how we go electric. And China was the tortoise to Japan's hare. Japan, the Japanese automakers are looking at China 20 years ago saying, hey, we've got a great gasoline auto industry. We're so far ahead of China, they're never going to catch up. Well, China's very smart. Came up with a whole bunch of ways, willingness to commit, government programs to support electric vehicle manufacturing, incentive programs to encourage consumers to try electric cars. At one point, they let consumers drive an electric car every day of the week if you wanted to, when a gas car you can only drive every other day. So long story short, around the world, the Chinese manufacturers are ahead of anybody in the West, and consumers have jumped on the adoption bandwagon. Where else in the world do we look for comparisons? Norway is 90% electric. Quick story there for anybody who is roughly my generation X. One of the ways Norway got electric is the lead singer for the band Aha built his own electric car and developed a network of people and demonstrated and sat in the 90s and said, we need to go electric.
In the 90s.
So that in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so my book also discusses policies in Norway. But let's loop back to one of the things that you mentioned, range anxiety.
Yeah.
In my book, I try to look backwards to history, lessons we can learn, and forward to how do we change things. I'm a big believer that humans come up with great ideas, but every great idea also has some downside. So Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, and John Burroughs, who was a naturalist, were a group called the Vagabonds. They took the first road trips in the late teens and the early 20s of the last century. They had to carry their own gasoline because there were so few gasoline stations.
And probably not many roads either.
Well, there were roads, but what many people don't know is the Model T was built to be highly repairable. You could fix it with only like 3 basic tools, a hammer, a screwdriver, and a saw. So they fixed things. In 1920, there was 1 gasoline station for every 2,000 gasoline vehicles in the United States. By 1930, it was a gasoline station for every 200 vehicles with an order of magnitude more gasoline vehicles. So chicken and the egg, we're facing the same problem, particularly in the U.S., but around the world, is how do we build out a charging infrastructure so that people can take their cars on road trips and long trips? What a lot of people don't realize, a plug for willingness to commit, is I've had a Tesla for over 5 years. 95% of my charging happens at home. It is easier and cleaner to plug in my electric car. It takes maybe 10 seconds when I get home. It takes 10 seconds to unplug, and there's no gas fumes, no spillage. Now, to be fair, if you don't have your own garage and you don't have a dedicated place for your car, that's a whole nother challenge. But I believe we will figure these things out. It's a matter of putting a lot of great minds to work on it. There are thousands of people around the world researching new battery technologies. Mm-hmm. And my book has an entire chapter on power sources, which is my attempt as a supply chain person to try to understand, okay, where does the original power come from? Is it renewable or fossil-based? How does it flow to get into cars? How do we recycle the batteries at the end of the life? Because that's going to be very, very important. And basically, what's the whole supply chain look like to get to better for the environment and better for people?
Yeah, it really does come back to, when it comes to the consumer who really makes the decisions here, what's working for them. And it seems to me, at least here in the United States, the government was really strongly pushing electric vehicles. And so the car makers all jumped on board. But it's almost as if they forgot to talk to the consumers about, do you really want this? A great analogy, I had a guest on the show that gave a great analogy to this, was back when everyone was picking on McDonald's for making food that wasn't healthy. So they decided, okay, they invested hundreds of millions of dollars in a healthy menu, put it out there, and guess what? People didn't want it, at least from them. And they lost, you know. So I look at cars, I know it's a silly analogy, but I look at cars that way a little bit because I'm a car guy. I work in the car world. I talk to a lot of people in the car world, and I have nothing against EVs. I've only driven the Tesla other than that first Volt that came out when they first came out. And I enjoyed driving it. As a car guy, it kind of was a little too vanilla for me. It wasn't the excitement I like about driving cars, but I like the way it went fast. I like the regenerative braking quite a bit. The way that worked was very, very cool. But I will say the times I've rented it have been on vacations where I'm not really driving that much. So the idea of charging wasn't a huge problem, like going across the country. However, it was always gnawing at my mind. Where am I going to charge this thing? How am I going to charge it? I'll give you an example of Hertz rented me one. Now they've abandoned most of their EVs.
Well, let me I don't want to interrupt your story, Mark, but let me put a pin in that one. Hertz's rollout of electric cars was abysmal. So keep talking, but we'll come back to Hertz.
Yeah. And I enjoyed driving. It was great. But again, I kept thinking, well, how am I going to get this thing charged? I had a few situations where I learned about different kinds of chargers. I went to have lunch somewhere, found a place to plugged in, came out, and it says, you've added 7% to your vehicle. And that was a 2-hour lunch. I'm like, uh-oh. Anyway, my whole point here is just that concern of, how am I going to use the thing? And like you said, if you live somewhere where you don't have a garage and you can't plug the thing in. So yeah, the rollout in many ways has been, what do I dare say, you know this way more than I, too fast to try to push this on, let's say just in America, consumers? Because again, where do I power this thing? How easy is it, right?
Well, number of ways to address that, and those are complicated questions, Mark.
Yes.
Your McDonald's analogy is very good. I've taught cases on McDonald's for 30 years now. When they went healthier, I think it was 15 years ago, they introduced an apple and walnut salad where they had to arrange the sourcing of apples because overnight when they introduced that, they became the number 2 user of apples in the entire world.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's transforming the supply network. We've got to do that to make things work. Our supply networks are complicated. But let's go back to General Motors. So Mary Barra is my 4th visionary. She sees far in the future. The Bolt was a very successful electric vehicle, but it didn't make much money for General Motors. So the ability to profit, gear number 2. Mary Barra is the CEO, first female CEO of one of the major car makers, very successful, going on 11 years now. But she reports to shareholders who have to make a profit. So the change is happening, transforming the supply network. Estimates are that the major car makers have announced $200 billion in investments in their factories, distribution centers, charging networks for electric cars. The change is going to happen. You can't unwind that ability to profit. But at the same time, they have to sell their cars, willingness to commit to customers. The Bolt's a great car, but it's not a mass market car. It's a entry-level, lower-cost car, but still more expensive than a similar entry-cost car, right? What we're seeing with the legacy OEMs, the Fords, General Motors, Stellantis, BMWs, is they're trying to titrate and find the right strategy. The Ford F-150 Lightning, I'm not a truck guy, but oh my God, as an engineer, I kind of want to buy one because you can power a crew of 5 or 6 people, contractors, if you're working on houses, off of it. But oh Lord, it's $100,000 or more. Anybody not named Musk or Bill Gates doesn't have that kind of money. So what we're facing is a couple of years ago, there was a period of irrational exuberance. Okay, the government's going to get behind this. The companies are going to commit things, and this is going to be an easy revolution. No, it's not. I think we're looking at carnage period now. For the next couple of years, a lot of experts and people who follow industry think there's going to be some bankruptcies and some failures. Look at what's happening with Volkswagen. Volkswagen in Europe is, a fair way to say it would be, on life support.
Yeah, didn't they just announce they're closing a huge factory?
Yeah, they're facing, they're not selling well. They have too much capacity. They've got a lot of challenges. But I would like to switch gears for a second and make sure I give a little shout out to visionary number 5.
Yes.
Rob Hansen. So I have an entire chapter on tires.
Yeah,
Why tires?
I found that really fascinating because the naysayers of the EV world they always try to point out all the problems, as many people do when revolutionaries come along, or people that are trying to, disruptors, I call them. I love disruptors. They're the ones that make change happen. They picked on Jobs when the Apple iPhone came out and said, what a stupid thing. But, oh, well, we know how that went. Tires, though, this is very fascinating to me. Can you touch? I don't want to give away too much in the book because I want people to buy it. But can you touch on why tires? I thought we were talking about EV cars. What does that have to do with anything?
Well, we are nominally talking about electric vehicles, but we're also talking about opportunities for change. So most people have not heard of a little ingredient that makes our world go round. It's called carbon black. Mm-hmm. And I'll start with, the original man is white because tires, until about 1910, 1915, were made out of rubber, which naturally goes towards white. But carbon black, which is essentially soot, it's made from petroleum, it's dried carbon. Producing it is enormously bad for the environment. But carbon black makes up 30% of every automobile tire on the planet, bicycle tires, mascara, paint, all the black tubing in your car, so many things, everywhere. And it's dirty as hell, excuse my French, for the environment. Which brings me to a large portion of the tire chapter is focused on a company called Monolith Materials. Rob Hansen and Pete Johnson met in graduate school at Stanford in the Silicon Valley. And mechanical engineers, they get jobs for a solar energy company. And they kind of look around and they go, I don't want to work for somebody else. I'd like to change the world. So they said, well, let's look for a product that is better for the environment, better economically, that can change the world. And they researched, went to the library at nights, and so on. And they came across a paper by a gentleman by the name of Laurent Fulchery. who is a professor at the École de Mines Paris, which is not in Paris. It's in Caen, but Professor Fulchery is a genius. In 1995, he published an article saying, hey, we can make this carbon black thing from natural gas, and it produces carbon black and either hydrogen or ammonia, and it's much better for the environment. That was theoretical. By the time that Rob Hansen and Pete Johnson found him, they fly to France in 2010, 2011, and Professor Fulchery says, hey, you want to see how my machine works? And he walks into the corner of his lab, tweaks a couple dials, beep, 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 and natural gas comes in, and out the other side comes carbon black. Long story short, they have a third founder, Bill Brady, who was this high-level executive at Continental Carbon Black. There's not been a new plant to produce carbon black built in the United States in 65 years.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a dirty industry, and you make relatively little money, but everybody needs this. It's a commodity product. What they were able to do is convince Bill Brady that this was economically better because the combination of natural gas with the explosion in natural gas availability in the U.S. 15 years ago was economically cheaper than producing carbon black with petroleum and has reduction of carbon dioxide emissions by 80%. Win-win. Small problem. You have to create an entirely new process. You have to transform the supply network. So Monolith Materials has been trialing that. Much more in my book, but essentially they started in California. They built a test facility. Then they moved to Nebraska and they built a production scale facility. And they are, from what I hear, getting very close to a final announcement to go forward and increase their capacity by a factor of 10. But that requires huge investments. So they have a conditional loan of $1 billion from the Department of Energy to build that out. Because the Department of Energy would like to see less carbon emissions and would like to see our economy transformed. One of the reasons they put that plant in Nebraska is one of their byproducts is either hydrogen or ammonia. Well, ammonia is the basic ingredient for fertilizer. So we have a lot of farmers in Nebraska. The market's right there for their ammonia.
Nice circle there. Fascinating things. You know, one other thing I wanted to touch on here, and there's a lot in this book that you dive very deep into, which I love. I mean, it's so rich in knowledge, is a question: are we trading one problem for another? That is the use of fossil fuels for rare earth metals, batteries. That's been one of the big things noted here of, oh, look what has to happen to make these batteries happen. And I wonder if you would touch on that idea along with part of your book. You talk about lithium-ion batteries. And then I'm going to have you dive into a little bit more about a question I have is, okay, electric is great, but you got to plug in, where's the power that makes that electricity coming from?
Right.
I know there's three parts to that, but I wonder if you could touch on those. Again, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but you know so much about this.
Right. Well, I love that you prompted us there, Mark.
That's my job.
So here's humans do smart things, but there are always unintended consequences. So let me briefly take a step back and say Marcus Samuel. Do you recognize that name?
No.
Most people don't. Marcus Samuel was a merchant in London. His father sold seashells. Marcus, the reason history knows him is Marcus went to Azerbaijan in 1888. Biggest oil field in the world was Baku, was producing, I think, 20 million barrels a day. Was so big, we didn't even know how to cap oil wells at that time. There was this giant lake of oil. Now, most people have heard of John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, yeah.
And the Rothschilds. Rockefeller's Standard Oil monopoly had cut a deal with the Rothschilds that they could sell some oil to Asia, and they were shipping oil to Asia in tiny little tins, 3 inches long, an inch high, and a couple inches wide, in a wooden ship.
Wow.
Now, a smart listener can fill in the gap now. Marcus Samuel is the guy who commissioned and had built the first viable oil tanker, the Murex, named after a shell. And I won't tell the whole story of how he did it, but I will tell you that he was one of the founders of Shell Oil.
There you go.
He made himself a lot of money, and a couple years after the Murex was launched, it rescued a British destroyer or battleship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. Can you imagine you're the British Navy and along comes this oil tanker and it saves you?
Yeah. And
So
doesn't look so good, does
Marcus
it?
Daniel got a knighthood.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, back to our current problem. Yes, extracting cobalt, lithium, manganese, all the things we need for electric vehicles can be dirty, can be messy, can be abusive to people. But we can do better. In 2024, we have got a lot of eyeballs on all these things. There's a lot of people looking into things. So it's a matter of right sizing and right regulating the mining companies. It's a matter of building out a circular economy. So there are multiple people. Service Solutions is one. Life Cycle is another. Redwood Materials is founded by J.B. Straubel, who is one of the 5 co-founders of Tesla. J.B.'s the guy not named Musk. All of these companies are looking at ways to capture batteries at the end of life, recycle them, and capture these rare earth elements that, on the plus side, are fairly valuable and expensive. So in theory, we can build a supply chain to capture this stuff at the end of life and reuse it. Theory is difficult. And I'll give you a quick example of catalytic converters. Catalytic converters in the U.S. are recycled, 97%. But they also have valuable stuff in them, which is why 5% of them get stolen.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, yeah, that's an industry in and of itself, it seems like.
Which is yet another reason to go electric, because you have no catalytic converter to get stolen. But let's go to what I call original power sources. The world is generally better off if we use more renewable. Solar, hydro, wind, some nuclear. There's a lot of debate about that. But the problem is that it's not reliable. We can't turn it on and off. So another thing that the world needs that many people are researching is power storage. And how do we store power when the sun doesn't shine? We still have power at night so we can watch television, watch our football games, whatever we're going to do, right? One of the potential ways is what's called a second use of a battery. And you're seeing applications of this build up. I talk about a stadium in Rotterdam, Netherlands, soccer stadium, where they repurposed 500 batteries from Nissan Leafs. So Nissan Leaf, until 2019, I believe, was the best-selling electric car until Tesla took that title. For this stadium, the way lithium-ion batteries work, it's pretty much precisely like your phone. Your phone gets to the point where it'll only hold 40% charge. Now it's a problem getting through a whole day. You don't want to be charging it all the time. So if you have the means, you go buy another phone. We need to recycle that phone. Well, batteries for cars, 40% of the battery is still pretty useful if you get enough of them. Hence, they take 500 of them and they make them stationary. They put them there to capture the power from solar panels on the soccer stadium roof, and they have power for when they want to play the games at night. When we do that, when companies find a way to turn the gears of change and make money on this, it becomes a nice self-reinforcing mechanism to go greener for the environment, for the economy, for people.
A lot of innovation going on here and a lot of smart people. And it drives me to the next question here about inspirational people for you. You have uncovered so many inspirational people, and you've mentioned some names here to people like myself, I'm sure people haven't even heard of. Is there one person right now in the EV world that might be what you would call a most influential person that's helping drive this forward? A lot of puns in there. Sorry about that.
Right. And hence why the publisher called my book 5 Visionaries, which has grown on me over time. There's so many visionaries, people trying things. You know, the founder of Rivian is trying to put a truck out there to compete with Tesla. There are people doing things in what's called the energy transition space, trying to figure out how to make renewables work better. Renewables are far cheaper than fossil fuels if you're starting from a blank slate. But at the same time, we got to figure out things like how to store this, right?
Yep.
So there are people around the world researching, starting companies, trying things, and this is how the world
moves
works.
forward.
I forget off the top of my head which Nobel Prize winner said this, but one of the Nobel Prize winners in economics said there are really only two scarce resources that make the world go around: information and energy. And what we're seeing is in 2024, we have an energy revolution coupled with an information revolution and AI.
Oh, yeah. There's another one.
And another thing toward that is people looking at using devices in your car and artificial intelligence to monitor, what is the health of, if I have an electric car, of the battery? And what's the battery worth when I trade that in? And again, it can be a little bit scary to customers, but people learn. And so I'll point at myself. I'm a pretty smart guy, but I do some amazingly dumb things. My kids and my wife all made bets when I got my Tesla 5.5 years ago. How long till Ken runs out and forgets to charge his car?
Oh, God.
And I'm not.
Thanks, family.
Right?
Yeah, thanks
and
for your support.
I've not done it yet. I'm not run out of charge. You kind of, it's like anything else. It's like what I said earlier with Henry Ford having to carry his own gas. You figure it out, you learn.
Yeah, becomes just kind of part of the day in a way. I don't drive my cars much, so I keep them on battery tenders because we don't drive cars that much anymore. And every time I come in, plug it into the wall. And sometimes I think, well, maybe I should have an EV because I do this every time because I might not drive this car for another 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So the battery.
You're a perfect use case. So pick a good electric car. I'd look at the Honda Prologue. So let me give a quick shout out. I have a whole other chapter on Honda, Nervous Giant.
Oh, yeah.
Honda has its North American headquarters is 45 miles from northwest of my house. There's a long history that I profile in my book. Part of it is they have the largest manufacturing plant for internal combustion engines in Ann, Ohio, just northwest of my house, about an hour and a half. They make 11 million gasoline engines a year.
Wow.
Honda is also the company that was profiled in the 80s by strategy researchers as one of the original companies identified as having a core competence when the term was invented. Their core competence? Internal combustion engines. Does that make you a little nervous if you're facing an electric vehicle revolution?
A little bit, yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's silly to count Honda out. They just launched recently in the last 4 months their first all-electric car, the Prologue, which is built on a chassis partnered with General Motors. And from what I can tell, it's getting very good reviews, seems to be selling fairly well. It's Honda. I have confidence that Honda's pride is not going to allow them to put out a crappy electric vehicle. They also have a huge new facility with an investment of several $100 million to produce batteries that is being built 40 miles south of my house.
There you go.
Two things can be true. They're great at gas cars. They are going to make themselves great at electric cars.
That brand, when you go back, I mean, you think of back in the 70s when they brought in those little tiny Hondas into the U.S. market when we had the gas crisis. And people kind of laughed at them, but at the same time they went, oh, that's kind of smart if I've got to drive a lot. and thus launched the small car revolution, that many people followed.
Which is exactly why they're in my book, is I wanted a comparison to Vinfast, because what Vinfast is trying to do is what Honda did 50, 60 years ago. And Honda first came to Ohio building a motorcycle plant in 1977. And then they opened up their auto plant, rolled off the Accord, and by the end of the decade of the 80s, for 3 straight years, they had the best-selling vehicle in America. It's easy to forget that now because Honda today doesn't look like Honda did 60 years ago, but built on being really good at gas cars. And from what I can tell, they've got a similar commitment to being electric, and they're rolling at that, and we'll see where they come out.
It's fascinating. I like to play a little bit of a car psychologist with my guest here and crawl into your head a little bit. Now, if you were manifest, reincarnated as a vehicle, and this isn't what you want to be, Ken, this is how you perceive the man in the mirror, what kind of vehicle would you be? Would it be gasoline or would it be electric?
Well, there's no doubt I'd be electric at this point. If you look at the basic engineering, they're better cars. There are fewer moving parts. You don't need the gears for the differential to accelerate, so they accelerate fast. Any challenges that exist are based on the computer management of the power management system and the fact that we're in the first inning of a multiple inning game. We've had 100 years or more to improve gasoline cars. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is the thermal efficiency of gasoline cars has moved from something like 25% to approaching 30% today. 70% of the gasoline that's burned in a car just goes up in heat and into the atmosphere. Electricity has other efficiency challenges, but it's far more efficient.
One thing I wanted to ask you, and it's been resting in my mind, is the oil companies and how they're looking at this. And some oil companies, and I believe in your book you talk about this, are really dedicating a lot of energy into the EV concept, which seems contradictory in a way because, well, wait, we want to sell gas. That's what we do. We pump it out of the ground and sell it to people. And they have so much power. I mean, they've obviously, massive amount of power because of the money behind them. How are, let's just say some, or maybe one, I don't know, gasoline companies trying to look forward to the EV concept? And how will they transition as less and less people use gasoline? And will they just be powering all the power plants that are providing the electricity, or how do they play in this role?
Well, that's a fascinating thing to look at because there's literally sitting on billions, if not trillions of dollars of reserves. And it's irrational to expect a human being to say, hey, I'm just going to walk away from a bunch of money or a bunch of resources. That's just not how human beings work. So many of the oil companies are doing what I call greenwashing. They're talking about doing some things, but they're not really committed. But at the same time, there are others trying to straddle a careful transition. So I'll bring up quickly Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman is the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia. There are two car companies that are great examples. Lucid is heavily financed by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Sear is a company that they're trying to build in Saudi Arabia from nothing, also financed by money. Mm-hmm. MBS is trying to create a more diverse economy in Saudi Arabia and using the kingdom's vast wealth to fund the equivalent of, hey, I'm surfing on one wave. Can I jump to another surfboard and surf that wave? And by the way, coming back to one of my visionaries, Jim DeLuca, he finished a 4-year gig in Vietnam for which they had to get special permission because a 3-year visa is all you can get. Went back to Michigan, spent a period of time, and got another call. Mm-hmm. He's now the CEO of Sear, trying to build a car company in Saudi Arabia. So he's having an interesting time, and I've talked to him. I interview him in my book. He's doing that partly because he's clearly an automotive guy, and he loves cars, but he sees a way to make this revolution happen.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about, but you've touched the tips of many, many things here. And I want to encourage the listeners today to get their hands on The Electric Vehicle Revolution. Of course, it's by Kenneth K. Boyer. You can call him Ken, but that's how you'll find him. Published by our friends at Roman and Littlefield. I want to take you on a little bit of a drive before I let you go today, Ken. Here's how this works. I will provide any, let's call it electric vehicle today, any electric vehicle in the world in your driveway, and you can take it on a drive anywhere you'd like to take it. And more importantly, you can take anybody with you, including somebody from the past who's no longer with us. So what does the ultimate drive look like for you?
Wow, that's a good question.
Kind of a fun one.
How about this one? I'll take a Lucid Air. They're supposed to be spectacular cars. I'm going to bring my wife along because I don't want to get in trouble.
Good man.
But I would also like to bring Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Mm. Again, as we talked about earlier, it took some of the first road trips. And where did those start? Those started, if I remember right, there was a World's Fair in San Francisco in sometime during World War I, 1914, 1915, where their sons took a long road trip and camped and carried their own gasoline and came back and said, hey, Dad, to Henry Ford and to Thomas Edison. And they said, this is pretty cool. You take this car, you can go anywhere you want.
Yeah.
And that was the genesis of Ford and Firestone and Edison taking car trips. So I think it'd be really cool to recreate that in a Lucid and go down Big Sur Highway in California.
There you go. I've done that trip many times, once on a bicycle. So yeah, that's where, I think that's the road that most of my guests want to take a drive on. Now, having grown up in Southern California and lived in California for many, many years before I moved up here to the Pacific Northwest. That road is spectacular. So I know we can't bring back Henry and Thomas, although that would be quite fascinating to listen to them sit in the back seat of that wonderful Lucid Air and go, oh my gosh, what's that? I would encourage you, maybe you can go rent a Lucid Air, or with the experiences you've had with this book, find somebody who will loan you one and take that ride with your wife. I think that's a great idea. Could you leave us with some parting words of wisdom or advice, and hopefully some words of positivity about the future?
Sure. So first off, I want to give a shout out for my book, The Electric Vehicle Revolution, 5 Visionaries Leading the Charge. And you can find it on Amazon. You can look me up at Ohio State. Ken Boyer, Ohio State will find me. Or go to my website, gearschange.com. Whatever words of wisdom I have is, human beings do some amazingly smart things. We do some amazingly stupid things. But collectively, we have this society that takes one idea and people pull it apart and try to find the good things in it, the bad things, the money-making things for sure, hence why ability to profit is one of the gears of change. We have opportunities now to change our world to be far better, and it starts with power sources. I am a big proponent of renewable energy. My first job was on a nuclear submarine, so
Wow.
We won't go down that thread. I think nuclear can be one of the platforms we do, but it's expensive. But anyway, long story short, human beings, we figure stuff out, and there's a lot of really smart people trying a lot of really cool ideas. Most of them will fail, but we only need a few of them, and then we copy the ones that work.
Yeah. When you go back in time and think about all the different car manufacturers that used to exist and slowly kind of faded away for whatever reasons and whatnot, and who we ended up obviously the big three. Now the world's changed from that in many different ways. But yeah, you're right. Always keep faith in human beings because they will find a way. Sometimes maybe it's the wrong way, but most of the time it ends up being the right way. So I like the way you said that. I want to do a shout out to PJ Lawrence at C.S. Lewis and Company Publicists. They're the ones that introduced me to Ken today. So thank you very much for doing that. Ken, thanks for coming on board and sharing some visions of the future. I really encourage people to read this book, whether you are pro or against EV, where you really think that's the way to go, or you're not quite sure. Read this book. It will open your mind to a lot of things, as it did mine, to how we got to where we are and perhaps where we're going. Until you and I talk again, Ken, I'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Mark. It was great being on the show.
A lot of fun. Today's vehicles are essentially computers on wheels, and it takes more than a wrench and oil to keep them humming. That's why Cars Yeah supports TechForce Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to driving tomorrow's workforce of skilled technicians forward. Techs keep our cars, trucks, airplanes, and fleets rolling. Yet there's a massive tech shortage because many young people don't know it's no longer a blue-collar job. Today, it's a new-collar career. It involves computers, technology, it's in high demand, you get paid really well, and you can live and work anywhere in the country. I know you're passionate about cars, trucks, and motorcycles, and you can help pass that passion on to the next generation of techs so our rides keep rolling down the road. Visit techforce.org today and learn how.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah.